peccato a lungo, molto a lungo. Padre, per tutta la vita io ho cercato di tenerla fuori dalla porta, di oscurarla. Quella cosa che adesso è qui viva e mi guarda. La mia coscienza.
Jean Valjean, fratello mio. Da questo momento voi non appartenete più al male, ma al bene.
La vita è una scena che ha solo poche quinte.
È un sipario dipinto solo da una parte.
Niente! Non ho rubato! Niente! Il mio vero nome è Jean Valjean. Quest'uomo è innocente.
Vedi? Ecco che cosa c'è. Un galeotto, un farabutto e il suo nome è Jean Valjean.
Cos'è?
È morta.
Javert, avete ammazzato questa donna.
Ah, quante storie.
Le farei scoppiare il ventre a colpi di zoccolo.
Ma il suo vero nome, questore, è Jean Valjean.
I più vivi complimenti, commissario Javert.
Ispettore, soltanto ispettore.
Da questo momento, commissario.
Benvenuto nella rivoluzione, Marius Pontmercy. Libertà! Andiamo a morire! Non potrò mai cancellare la bontà di Jean Valjean. Sì, si potrà cancellare Jean Valjean dalla memoria del mondo, ma resterà nella mia.
È raro che un uomo cada nel baratro senza restare sfigurato. C'è un punto in cui i disgraziati e gli infami si mischiano in un solo popolo con un unico terribile nome, i miserabili.
E ricordatevi, Marius, è per loro e per i miserabili che noi esistiamo.
Bello! Chi l'ha scritto? Victor Hugo. Lo conosci?
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to have a kind of a peculiar experiment here. I'm really very happy to be here with Davide. He was unlucky enough to have me as a professor of history and philosophy at high school, but he's still here with me. So probably I was not too bad with him. What we have in common is the love and passion for this novel. We are trying to interpret this text according to our personal experience. I turned the 1,500 pages of the novel into the 90 pages of a theater script. So, the contents of a novel was transformed into a different language, and you learn a lot by doing this. Davide has a passion for the novel and for the musical film of Les Miserables. Thanks to him, many people were able to read and understand this author and this novel. So we've got something in common. We're not experts, we're just experts of our job, and we're here to speak about this novel then. At the beginning, I didn't have a clue I would do this kind of work. This work lasted 4 months. I worked throughout the day, And I owe that to Franco Branciaroli. It was him who inspired me. Franco Branciaroli is not here with us, unfortunately, but he gave us an interview, and we're going to watch it before starting our speeches. This is part of the 7-8 novels which go beyond the novel for mankind. It's not that they are the most beautiful novels ever, but, for example, Crime and Punishment is yet another novel which is not the most beautiful one in the world, but it's one of the untouchable novels. Les Miserables, transformed by Luca Doninelli, which is very difficult because it's 1,400 pages that have to be transformed into not even 3 years of theatre play. So just a few scenes that were chosen, the most meaningful ones. Jean Valjean does not speak. That's his peculiarity. He is a sort of physical presence, mostly. This man is well famous for his strength, its physical strength and psychological strength. So, interpreting the novel is not a problem, even because the lines of a novel and what people say in a novel have to be transformed when they go to stage. So it could be quite easy. The most interesting thing is the character himself, because he's a good character, good man, and one of the reasons why the novel is so successful is that, and in theater is so successful, is that it's difficult in the theater to see good characters, but he is good enough. And that does have an impact and draws the audience attention. Jean Valjean is probably virgin. We don't know about that. But we don't know whether he has had any relations with women, which is quite strange. He's a strong man, sturdy man, probably 60 years old. And there is no love story with him, which is strange. What makes it even stranger is that a man like this takes a child, takes a girl home, 7 or 8 years old. They live together, and she stays with them until she becomes a teenager. The unsaid continues to be the unsaid, so it leaves a space, room for imagination. But when she starts to meet boys, there is something going on in Jean Valjean, and something very violent going on with him. And he almost even wants to commit suicide. So, in the end, he is a good character, but quite a problematic one, quite troublesome. Now, this title corresponds to the words pronounced in Medea, and I quote: "A man can be lucky, but not happy." Defining happiness is somewhat complicated, and not the least constant. Happiness cannot be constant. Happiness goes against unhappiness. So by contrast with unhappiness, happiness can occur. Unhappiness can be so strong that the fact that you are less unhappy, you can be happy. However, I've never felt a pure happiness. Jean Valjean was happy by contrast. He was so unhappy in his life that the fact that he became less unhappy he became happy. For other people, it wouldn't have been happiness. To him, it was happy. 20 years of hard work for him was very hard. That's why he was unhappy. So one day, drinking a coffee in a bar would be enough to be happy. In addition to that, then he met people like Cosette, so a very intense, very dense human relation. And he meets also a paradox, which is a Christian paradox. At the umpteenth robbery in the bishop's house, he's caught by the police, is taken back to the bishop with all the things he has stolen, and the bishop tells him, you know that you have forgotten to steal something. So the evil is paid with the good. Which is why he gets a new knowledge, a way to get familiar with life, which is not his own. Is a totally Christian character. So this character, let's say, is not described in the same way on stage. It must be imagined by the actions that he made and by what he did, because actually you don't see him doing something. You only see him on stage after he has done something, and you watch him, and the actor must be able to communicate his power, his physical power, physical strength and mental strength. And then in the end, he lost everything. He loses Cosette, he loses everything, and is convinced he's gonna die. He doesn't care about that. And he says it very clearly, bluntly. He says, put my body there. I'll give my body if we all have to die. Do you think that this story is a topical one? Is a modern one? It is very topical, I would say, in the modern world. In Bangladesh, for example, somewhere in the world, it would be topical, modern. But there are certainly people like this today. Jean Valjean is a sort of saint. I wouldn't say modern, topical, if by topical and modern you think about common sense, no. Or a usual way of thinking. However, you have signs of a different life which is possible. How was it to interpret Jean Valjean for you? Well, I had to be silent, I have to say, which maybe is harder to do. It's more tiring and exhausting rather than doing King Lear, sorry. But the theater does have an advantage for an actor. In your lifetime, you can develop your own culture, because in 50 years of work, you get familiar with many things. For example, this is a novel that I was reading when I was young, but I didn't get till the end, and I had to reread it again. I had to read it in detail. Are you happy? No. As I said beforehand, I think that happiness is something occurring in between unhappiness. You must be able to realize about the fact that you're no longer happy, and you have to enjoy that period of time. And it's not difficult to realize that. But no, I'm not happy. I mean, there are some moments when I can be somewhat happy, but because you come out of all the tensions you have, and then each one has a different life. Well, I don't really agree with Franco on happiness, but each one of us can have their own ideas. I'm going to start, and then Davide will follow up to what I said. And at the beginning, I'm going to tell you what I understood by working on this. And since I've been thinking about this novel and working on this novel for about 40 years, I read quite a lot of novels. And I'm going to tell you some very simple things which I understood, even to introduce the novel Les Misérables, to make you understand what type of novel it is and what type of work I could do in order to transform it into a theater play. I think that that could interest many of you, even non-experts. First of all, I could tell you that to me, in the novel, there is the Odyssey, the Divine Comedy, the novel as a whole, I would say. Which, in modern times, have become the novel, which comes from the Odyssey and the Iliad rather than from the British medieval novels of the 18th century. So, I'll be general to start. The novel is always the attempt of a man to understand the link between man and the whole and everything else. So a novel is not just a portrait of society. It's also that. It's not just historical memory or telling history. It's also that. But had I to compare the novel to a galaxy, I would say that the center of this galaxy is a scene in which, to me, is the novel by excellence for many reasons, which is War and Peace. Who read War and Peace knows that right at the center of this novel, you have the scene where Pierre Bezukhov sees the comet. 1812. This comet is the symbol, is the link with the stars, the symbol of the novel. The novel talks about time, talks about history, but time is not really its nature, because it's like expanding, the expansion of what actually happens at one moment, at one specific moment in time. The link, the relation that I have here and now with the universe, the stars, history, life. And it's this relation which is the real nature of man. So the novel is not just a portrait, it's far beyond that, it's much more than that. It's something that can go beyond portraits. That also applies to Dante. Dante's works is the continuation of what happened at a specific point in time. This is what the story said about his works. Throughout his life, he tried to tell what happened to him at a certain moment in time. But we can talk about Proust, Manzoni, Dostoevsky, Joyce, Celine Kafka, and Victor Hugo, clearly, who wrote this wonderful novel. The second general aspect I want to mention is that the novel does not have a specific technique. Maybe an author can write the most beautiful novel in the world, but the second novel, he doesn't know how to write it. A very famous philosopher said that an artist doesn't only have to write a work, but also has to invent the way he has to write it. And this is the case for Victor Hugo. Now, the novel is not a technique. You don't learn how you write a novel. Never trust the books telling you how to do things. The novel is a sort of crater where the world disappears, and we need to find the words making the world come back, turning the world alive. So this empty crevice is the real nature of the novel. The great novels are the ones where the authors fall into a crevice. And then the novel can become a body. A body can be a book with a certain number of pages. A body is somebody which is in the bookshop, which is in the library, which has a cost. And therefore, a novel also have to have its own features according to the target readers. Hence, the literary genre, which have a lot in common among them, but they are somewhat different. You have the investigation novel, the crime novel, the journey novel, the love novel or popular novel, and then the so-called training or initiation novel, or also the holy novel. For example, in the crime novel, you have the lack, you have the emptiness, you have the crater I mentioned before. In terms of contents, could be a crime, because the detective has to go and investigate on somebody who has died, somebody who can no longer speak. And therefore, he makes the life of a person who no longer exists in order to understand what happened. And the vision, the writer's vision of life then is very important, because then you have different types of detective, those who really share and are empathic with the life of the person who was murdered, like Simenon's novels with Maigret, for example, and up to masterpieces like Oedipus, King of by Sophocles, or The Pasticciaccio by Gadda, where at some point the origin of the evil is inside us. And this is the never-ending story. So this is a novel starting from the investigation and then studying the detective's soul. And then you have the journey novel, from the Odyssey, for example, to the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is all but a journey. And for those of you who read it, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. And then you have adventure novels. Here you have some common traits, the common points. The fact that you have to find out about yourself. You don't go to Greenland or to the Amazon forest just to say what animals you have seen. But this is something concerning yourself. And this is why we're reading this book, this kind of books. And then there's the popular novel, or the love novel, which is the never-ending story of a love that cannot be, that cannot exist, a thwarted love, so to speak. From the great tragedy to Goldoni, for example, you have all the variants on a marriage that cannot be celebrated, up to the betrothed, because this is the same thing. They want to get married, but there's somebody who doesn't want them to get married. And these are the same stories that are deeply rooted in the oral tradition. Remember the betrothed. There's many characters coming from the oral tradition. Tonio and Gervaso, the smart brother and the stupid brother, which we have in so many traditional tales, popular tales. Then there are also illegitimate loves, other kinds of love. And another interesting aspect, which we often find in novels, is that in the novel we go deep down in order to search something, as Dante did, going from hell to purgatory. And there's something preventing us from doing so. There is a sort of enemy. An enemy that can have different forms. Snow White's queen, a dragon, the devil. Why in Star Wars or in Western films there's a final battle, there's a final clash, duel? Is that because authors have no fantasy, or because this is the way life is? Even in The Betrothed and in Les Miserables, there's a sort of clash, of conflict. In The Betrothed, there's Renzo forgiving Don Rodrigo. That is the final conflict, which is a duel, because if Renzo does not forgive Don Rodrigo, then it's Don Rodrigo winning. So it's like two people clashing, having a conflict, and shooting at each other. And in Les Miserables is very interesting also, because the conflict is with Marius. And then there is yet another novel, which is the holy novel, the initiation novel or training novel. and sometimes even an erotic initiation novel, Marquis de Sade, Georges Bataille, or some Japanese authors, for example. But a person is always introduced to something new, something which cannot be imagined, a real life which he didn't even think it would exist. So there's like a holy root in that. And there's two characteristics in that. And one was mentioned by Branciaroli, the fact that the most important event is at the beginning of the novel. At the beginning of Les Miserables, there is a gift that Bishop Myriel gives to Jean Valjean. The bishop says, no, I gave him the silverware. And he says, but you forgot something. But why did Jean Valjean forget something to steal? Maybe he was afraid of something. And the bishop gives them to him. No, you get this. And you understand that this is very important. So you do understand that there's things happening at the beginning. The most important event happens at the beginning. Then yet another feature of these novels is that psychology plays a secondary role. And maybe someone of you has heard the fairy tale, which is also told by the Grimm brothers, which is the fairy tale of the golden fish. A fisherman goes fishing, he fishes his golden fish and says, it says to him, let me go and I wish I'll make all your wishes come true. He doesn't ask for anything, but then the fisherman's wife says, no, you have to ask him for a beautiful house. And so he goes to the golden fish, and the wife is given the most beautiful house, but she's not happy with it. She wants something more. And then she wants to have a villa, then she wants to become the emperor. And all the golden fish always makes all the wishes come true. And then the wife becomes an emperor with an army and everything. Then the wife wants to become a pope. So, I want to become pope. So, she also wants the spiritual power then. So, the fisherman goes to the golden fish. And the golden fish, no, go back. He doesn't say yes or no. He says, no, just go back. He goes back. The fisherman goes back. And he finds the slum where he was living with his wife at the beginning. So there are two possible interpretations. Either the golden fish has had enough, and we can rightly understand that. The golden fish is understandable, but the author is not understandable. So why should he tell the story of a fish which has had enough? And then the second option is that the fish has also made his wish come true. Do you want to be the first one? Be the last one. The Pope in the Middle Ages was called the Servus Servorum Dei. The servant of the servants of God. Who wants to be the first has to be the last. Now, I don't want to make any quotes here, but this is how the fairy tale of the golden fish can have its own interest and its own importance. And this is the typical structure of the initiation novel. So there's an event occurring at the beginning, he fishes the fish, and then there's a whole story going through, leading to humiliation, and in humiliation, there's the final discovery of the person. So the fairy tale of the golden fish, to me, is strictly connected to the initiation novel. And that really applies to Les Miserables. The Betrothed is a popular novel written by a religious man, deeply religious man. Les Miserables is a novel, a holy novel, which is written by an author that was against the clergy, but still was a religious man. And this is not my own personal opinion. This is a fact. In the novels, the most important thing is the symbols. And here you have clear symbols. Those of you who have read Les Miserables know that Jean Valjean always goes around with a case. And in this case, there's a Cosette's dress. The old thing that he has of Cosette, because Marius Pontmercy took Cosette, and he no longer has Cosette. Still, he has her dress. Those of you who went to a christening once in your life know that the candle that is lit up by the fathers, usually it's the fathers lighting up the candle, and the white dress are the two symbols of the christening. No doubt about that. So it's a sort of drama with a liturgical structure, and this is absolutely clear. Then Branciaroli rightly said that Jean Valjean doesn't say anything. He is silent. Even because this novel is entitled Les Miserables and not The Adventures of Jean Valjean. Who are Les Miserables? At that time, the manifesto of the Communist Party talking about the underclass had already been published. The underclass that was angry with the life due to the work where there was a sort of tragedy. The family Thénardiers is very poor. I mean, the two characters of this family are very terrible characters, but they have two wonderful children, Pauline and Gavroche. And clearly there's a mix. He says that the society is just like a big mine with pits going deep down. At some point, people lose their human dimension and turn into monsters. If we look at the characters and how Victor Hugo worked, because if you have read Les Miserables, you must wonder how he could actually write this novel. When you read War and Peace and other novels, it's not the same thing, because they are such big authors, such great authors, that we love them, we admire them. But Victor Hugo was sort of crazy, and we wonder, but how could he actually think to have somebody walking with a corpse on his shoulder for 40 pages? It's like Victor Hugo said, okay, what are the 10 things that an author doesn't have to do? I'm going to do it. The novelist doesn't have to overlap with his characters, and he did. You don't have to make digressions, and I do it. And at the same time, he writes a masterpiece which doesn't even belong to the history of literature, but to the history of mankind, like the discovery of the Americans and so on and so forth. As Davide is going to talk about characters, I won't mention that, but there are characters that he really likes, and he lets them live, like Javert, which is one of the greatest characters in the history of literature. We always want to read the pages where you have Javert, because we know that there's something new, that I think that Javert's death is on one of the most important moments in the history of literature. There's Eponine. Her character is a poet, a sort of poetry poem. And then the characters have to be put on stage. So the hero is somebody who has to speak, and in this case, the hero does not speak. So you need to get the Victor Hugo words and put them in the character's mouth, because he cannot be silent. And the hero always wins, even in sacrifice. Whereas in this case, you have a journey where it's diluted. The hero has a clear psychology. In this case, there's no psychology, because at the beginning, Jean Valjean is really stupid, and then after a while, he becomes the mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer. He's a businessman, and you wonder, but I really don't understand why he's so stupid. Clearly, he's changed his name, but how has he become so smart? I mean, you don't really understand. Why so? Because Victor Hugo is not interested in Jean Valjean's psychology. He is interested in his journey of change, where he identifies all his mission with the fact that he has to obey to Fantine's requests to take care of Cosette. And Cosette, which is yet another very difficult character to put on stage because she is silent. She doesn't have a personality. She has to be persuasive. So you need really to strengthen this character. So it was difficult to put some characters on stage. Here, I wrote a nice speech, but I'm not going to read it through. I see there are people who are happy with that. I read this speech, but I want to listen to Davide speaking. Jean Valjean is not mentioned in the novel for hundreds of pages. But Victor Hugo knows that he wins over Jean Valjean. In the end, you cannot just speak about the underclass to speak about Les Miserables, but there must be a man who accepts the cross of becoming a miserable. At the beginning, Jean Valjean thinks that he can offset the evil that he did by doing good, but he can't. Then he goes and gets Cosette. He can rescue from Javert because Javert is always there. There's many coincidences in this novel, which would be bad for any novelist, but Victor Hugo doesn't care about that. He's not afraid of cutting a poor figure, for example. He doesn't really care. In the end, he has to bear humiliation when he no longer has Cosette. So what do I have in life, he thinks? What was my task in life? Taking care of Cosette. And as Franco said in the interview, Cosette becomes an adult. She starts thinking about love. There is a very nice sentence where she says, I know I'm ugly, but I looked myself in the mirror today saying, what if I was beautiful? It would be nice. So she finds out about her own beauty as something strange. She finds it strange that a boy can like him. And she falls in love with Marius Pontmercy. Jean Valjean realizes that. He tries in every possible way to divide the two of them. He wants to commit suicide, but he also wants to murder him. And in the end, he has to accept, and this is the final duel with the enemy, he has to accept that Cosette goes away. And in the end, you have Bishop Mien so with what I give you, Jean Valjean, I buy your soul. And in the end, in the show, they couldn't put that. But those of you who read Les Miserables know that there's a real strange. Jean Valjean's death is quite strange because, strangely enough, it's not a sad death. It's not pathetic. When we read about his death, there's something suspended. The people shooting the film have had to add things in a musical. For example, there's Eponine and Fantine coming to get the Jean Valjean's soul. I thought about a different ending because Hugo found it hard enough to write about Jean Valjean because it's very hard to get to know a convict. It's very hard to find a link between your experience and the experience of a convict. Because these are people who are totally, convicts are people who are totally separated from society. So it's like Homerus with Achille. He found it very hard to describe him. But in the end, the novel does work. And Victor Hugo is successful because Jean Valjean says yes, even at its last loss. Because the last loss is what the bishop gave him and the white dress, as in the christening. This is why, to me, it's a drama connected to christening. What is interesting is that in the script, I had to make this ending in order to make people understand, the audience understand the meaning of the story. Jean Valjean dies, Maurice and Cosette cry on that. The doctor says, okay, he is dead. At some point, there's somebody knocking on the door. The doctor goes and opens the door, and the Bishop Myriel comes in and says, come on, Jean Valjean, stand up. It's time to go. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Luca Doninelli, both for what he told us and for these unexpected invite, I would say. We left each other in the school when I ended sort of my high school. It was my professor of history and philosophy. But still, I had the opportunity not to lose sight of him and to appreciate his articles published on Avenir newspaper. So I'm a bit sort of moved and excited at the same time because once again, I mean, history repeats itself, and I'm the student, and he's the teacher, he's the master, because I'm not an expert at all when it comes to literature, because I work in the biochemistry sector. But still, today I dare to say something about this novel, and in particular to the play that has been based upon it and written by Mr. Doninelli. And I do this for two reasons. First of all, for these friendship that I had the great pleasure to find again. And secondly, because I'm a great reader and I love to read. I love to read novels and I love literature. And also, on top of that, I want to say something else and add another reason, because as a matter of fact, this novel has always charmed me. I find it intriguing, and not just for literary reasons. To me, oddly enough, and you will understand why I say so, this has to do with my encounter with the Christian experience through the charisma of Don Giussani. So you may ask yourselves, what's the connection between Victor Hugo and Don Giussani? Well, actually, they have nothing in common, or at least, as Victor Hugo, the author, said, he did not want to express any religious content and not even sort of use symbols relating to Christianity, even though Luca told us that this is not the case. And in a text he wrote, Victor Hugo said that his goal was to represent a people that was persecuted somehow, but that was good. And the novel had immediately great success, and especially among the poorest people. And Hugo wrote the destiny and life in particular, the time and in particular the century, man and in particular the people, God and specifically the world. This is what I tried to describe and put into this novel, a novel that is a historic novel, a political novel, and a social novel. However, as it often happens with important works, very often, these works go beyond the initial intentions of their author, and this is what makes the difference between just another piece of work and a masterpiece, because a masterpiece really touches the deepest sort of parts of any person, because that connects with the insight of any individual. So beyond the initial intentions declared by the author, the greatest aspect of this novel is that describes man, describes humankind, describes the natural willingness of man towards beauty, justice, and truth, and the desire to be loved, endlessly, immensely. And this is what I learned by getting to know a specific man. And to me, a new chapter of my life started with that. And that's why I decided to dare to take the floor here today. So, even though I haven't had yet the chance to see the play written by Luca Doninelli and put on stage by Franco Branciaroli and other actors, I think it will be a good experience. I've read some critics, and I've read positive reviews, but also some critics. And honestly, I do not agree with these critics, the very few ones, because some people criticize the choice of this novel that is outdated, that is obsolete, that is out of time, and so on and so forth. Too emphatic, and with specific sort of moral messages, but I do not agree with that, because Well, when the novel was published, even at the time, Hugo was somehow criticized, and also Baudelaire and Flaubert, his very famous colleagues, criticized him in the first place. So I feel very far from this kind of criticism because I do believe that this novel, as well as other sort of attempts to produce films, for instance, by Tom Hooper with Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway, and the attempts to make musicals out of it, are very modern works. And I think that this is extremely modern because I think that this novel is so close to today's men still. Just to give you some figures, the musical that was written and put into music in the 80s in Paris was so successful that then it was adapted into English and then in 21st languages and put on stage in 42 countries. So the English version is continuously put on stage in the London West End since 1985 and from 1987 in Broadway. So it's an ongoing production. And it got even so in the US 8 Tony Awards. But beyond these figures, I think that the content of this novel, are great and can make it still a very up-to-date book to read. And so I'll try to focus on that and try to tell you why this novel is so modern and so consistent with this year's meeting topic and title. So the absolute main character is Jean Valjean, and he goes through times of big changes in a France that wants to sort of reawaken from its ashes, the ashes of its past, so following the myth of freedom. But Jean Valjean, as Luca said, is not simply Jean Valjean. He represents much more than that. He embodies a man who that is multifaceted, can be very good but very bad. So he's a miserable man, as the title of the novel. And in the introduction of the book, Victor Hugo says that he wants to describe the people. He wants to describe how poverty makes people terrible, men, women, and the fact that even children can get terrible because of poverty. So the people made terrible by poverty are made miserable. They become miserable. But so when you lost everything, you didn't have anything left. Even dignity is gone. What remains? What is left then? So what can still make a man if it didn't have anything more? Well, if you have a look at the Thénardier couple, you may answer nothing. When a man loses everything, it's not a man any longer, because then it simply desperately looks for bribes suggested to feed himself, to fulfill its basic needs as an animal, but with only one difference with respect to animals, that is the following. It's defined by its ability also to be evil, to get to its goals, to achieve its goals. And that's what defines such a miserable condition, because he acts as a perpetrator still feeling like a victim. So if this is man, so then where is man? What is human left? I think that this is such a universal question. There's nothing more universal than that, especially in today's times. So the human experience of Jean Valjean and of the other characters tries to give an answer to this question, and trying also to be quite direct about it. As I said, I didn't have the chance yet, I haven't had the chance yet to see the play, and Luca has already described the novel, so I'll try simply to make some references now to the novel, but also to the musical. So, I decided to proceed like that for specific reasons, because even though, of course, the musical has major limits with respect to the original novel, because many descriptions are not there, but still there is a major advantage, because the musical accompanies and helps the spectator and viewer to see connections that maybe they are not self-evident. So sometimes, I mean, music is a big help in sort of helping people tracing connection between things and events and content. So this is very important and meaningful. So who is Jean Valjean? Jean Valjean is a convict condemned to forced labor, and he thinks he's not a man any longer. He's just a number, 24601. It's just that, just a number among so many other numbers, just one among many. And all those numbers lead a useless life that is meaningless. They do not expect anything. They do not have aspirations. And they live in a society that is totally indifferent to the human dramas of people like him. Jean Valjean is somehow pushed by Javert. He's a sort of watchdog and has to carry the stick that holds the French flag that is somehow dirty with the mud that seems to have overwhelmed the sons of this state. And Javert will be struck by Jean Valjean and his attitude, his strength. Where does that strength come from, asks Javert all along the novel. And they look into each other's eyes, and Javert at one point seems to be satisfied, but in a sort of mocking way, because he looks at him with superiority, feels superior. He thinks, I'm different, I will never be like Jean Valjean. So there can't be redemption for 24601. There can't be forgiveness for him. In the eyes of the convict, instead, there is the fire of resentment and rage that burn. And so this is a desire of sort of vengeance, because he stole, but he doesn't feel guilty. He feels the need of revenge, because he was so poor that he had to steal, but now he feels a debt towards his homeland. He stayed in prison 19 years for having just stolen some bread for his sister and his children, and the children of his sister. And so the strength of Valjean somehow sort of has created that rage. So, and he lost forever those 19 years. So he went in when he was 27, and he goes out of prison when he's 46. And so this rage is so deep and so big as his body, because he's very big as a person, but he's furious, is really hungry, is very angry, and his soul is even angrier and furious, because every man can be evil, and every man can express lowness, but at the same time highness. So Jean Valjean embodies the spirit of his time, and maybe also of our time, because he feels injustice and he wants to take revenge for his own generation. He feels he was injured by society. So Marius, Gavroche, and the others will be the martyrs of an absurd war, the barricades in the streets of Paris. And so they were ready to die crying liberté, égalité, fraternité. But then something happens, something unexpected happens in his life. So he was there to trying to express his his lowness, and so those rebellious young people kept crying because they had no unexpected event and they were about to die. They say, let's put up high the flag of freedom, every man will be a king. But actually, Jean Valjean is the only one who can turn this into reality because he's the real liberated man. He was a slave, but he becomes as big as a king and as great as a king. So we know the plot. So he gets out of prison thanks to amnesty, but he hasn't got anything. He paid his debt, and as Javert said, he will always be for the rest of his life a perpetrator. Somebody committed a crime, and he will remain for the rest of his life 24601, a former convict. So like sort of being spotted with something terrible forever. But instead, at one point, he meets Myriel, the bishop, and welcomes him in his home and gives him everything. But Jean Valjean can't resist the temptation. And at night, he steals precious things, but then he's arrested and brought back to the bishop. And so this is a pivotal element in the novel, because then what is totally unexpected happens and occurs. And this is exactly what will change his life forever, and also what's going to happen next, because not only the bishop says he gave him on purpose those precious things, but also he says, oh, you forgot the most important thing. So 2 silver candelabras that are worth much more than everything he had stolen. And so please forgive me if I stay on this for another couple of minutes and if I elaborate a bit on this. So not only the bishop turns the stolen silver goods into a gift, and he declares that he had given that as a gift to Jean Valjean, and he gives him even more, something more. And Jean Valjean is gobsmacked, astonished. I mean, let's try to imagine his feelings. And with this unimaginable, unexpected deed, is not only set free from his guilt, but instead he gets a precious gift because he discovers a freedom that is much bigger than the solution. So this is something that goes beyond his sort of comprehension, something that comes from gratuitousness. And so he can meet real freedom in Muriel. And so he succeeds in turning a lived and experienced injustice into a tool of self-empowerment. And so the hatred that was like a cage to him, even out of prison, is not there any longer. So Valjean is free, and is free as a person that can somehow sort of be loved now. And so, from now on, he can sort of live his life. He has been turned from a miserable into a king. And it is well known that even if Hugo, he was a Catholic by education, did not acknowledge himself as a Catholic, still it's inevitable to seize an analogy that could not be understood without making reference to a Christian experience. Because there is a match between the situation of Valjean out of prison and the theft and what happened to the bishop, because Muriel decides not to take revenge, but instead to give a gift. And so he gives what he had taken and stolen. And you cannot understand that without sort of thinking that through sort of that figure, that character, Jean Valjean meets Christ. Christ that somehow sort of decides to donate himself and somehow sort of going towards the perpetrator. And so this is the meaning of the deed of the bishop. So the blood of Jesus becomes the symbol of a gift, the sign of love, greater than evil, greater than the experienced injustice. This is what conquers the heart of Valjean. Forgiveness, forgiveness, a gift that has an immeasurable worth. And so the deed of Myriel reminds of the figure of Jesus Christ. So it's not just about getting away with it or just sort of somehow ignoring the deed. So Myriel believes in the power of mercy, and mercy can turn a miserable into something greater. So there is no commiseration. So, I mean, there is a willingness somehow of not commiserating him. So somebody still has to pay, so he will pay. And this is the mercy, the Christian mercy. So, the compassion, the pity, but somebody needs to pay for that, to pay for the reason that generated that evil deed. So mercy is based on an imbalance. That's why Myriel cannot simply forgive, but he has to pay for that. So he has to put something more than that, to put something on that. And that's why he gives the additional 2 candelabras as a gift. And so because of that, then he can assign a task to Jean Valjean, and he says, please remember, my brother, you use this for a bigger project. You need to use this silver to become an honest man. So from the martyrs, from passion, from blood, God sort of took you from evil and saved your soul. And Jean Valjean will answer, so God took you from darkness, from the night, and he will answer with what the seeds of love sown by the bishop in his heart will give an answer. And so he will devote his life to gratuitousness according to that incomprehensible logic that responds to what men are made for. But there is something additional that strikes me, because the change of Jean Valjean does not happen unexpectedly, I mean, thanks to a magic wand. Of course, there is a radical decision that is behind it, but this new consciousness sort of evolves thanks to the contribution of simple people, other miserables like him, that confirm nothing but the exceptionality of a life spent for gratuitous love. And Fantine, the poor Fantine, first and foremost, a young mother who becomes a prostitute to provide for the living of her child. And so, again, something that will sort of change Jean Valjean's vision. And in particular, I mean, he will decide to take care of her child Cosette when Fantine dies, and Fantine is arrested because she reacted to a bad client that decides to put a handful of snow, of frozen snow, into the neck of her dress. And Hugo really assisted to such a scene and to such an episode, and insisted to have that prostitute being set free from prison because he saw that episode for real. So it was quite a character, and the novel is based on some episode of his life. And so again, we know that when the life of man is overwhelmed by gratuitous love, becomes something great, something different, and it is easy then to see it anywhere when you see it, and to sort of hang on it as something that can save you. But again, real life puts you to the test continuously. I'll make some examples of that. And the very first one has to do with something that struck me a lot, but I was not the only one to be struck, because not long ago I was invited with some friends to a debate and with some prisoners of the Como prison after they saw Huber's film. And the footage that made them reflect the most is when an unknown is mistaken for Jean Valjean and could be condemned at his place. And so, wow, it's a great opportunity. That would be the final liberation from the scare of prison, because he had kept escaping, trying to hide. It would be once for all free, but can he betray his brand new freedom? So can freedom be possible without truth, without justice? He met and encountered real truth, real justice. What kind of freedom would that be based on injustice and sort of lack of truth? So he decides to take up his responsibility. So this shows that the change is real, and it really changes nature, his soul. It's not just something he pretended to be. So after terrible nights, he goes to the judge, and this time, absolutely free willing, repeats his number, the number that has become his identity, something that he had tried to reject. And he says, I am Jean Valjean, I am 24601. He repeats that name and a number. And then there is another episode occurring to Fauchelevent. He remains trapped beneath a chariot that is sort of killing him. He sees what is happening. Nobody does anything because nobody is able to lift the chariot. And so he assists to that terrible scene, and he remarks the gaze of Javert, because well, he's already looking at him with suspicion. He's suspecting about his identity. Javert remembered very well the extraordinary strength of Jean Valjean during forced labor. But still, in spite of that, Jean Valjean doesn't think twice. He acts. And the music of that episode, of that scene, well, not by accident, is the same that was in the beginning when Jean Valjean was working again to reminding about the connection between these two episodes and to underscore the force and the strength of Jean Valjean. But the meaning is great here, because that strength, that extraordinary and violent force of the beginning, that force, that strength resulting from the hatred and fury has turned into an even greater love, that of unconditional and gratuitous love. Or at the end, when Javert, falls into his arms, Jean Valjean can choose between two options. So a world that is a calculator and opportunistic world, it could kill him, or the gratuitous world, up to his own sacrifice. And once again, he opts for the second choice. But maybe, Luca already said it, from a certain point of view, well, maybe the most relevant aspect is when Jean Valjean decides to give up his love for Cosette, and these acquired and gained child that he loved with purest affection, that was everything he had, is only good. So he decides to sort of renounce her because she fell in love with Marius. And I think that this is the climax, the biggest climax ever. And he risks his life to save Marius. And he will be alone. He knows that he will be alone and naked and empty and deprived of the only good he had, and so he will become as miserable as he was in the beginning. But it's not like that, because something has transformed and changed his life forever. So he has changed because there's a plan that goes beyond the material, tangible things that he may or may not have. So I would like to end and come to a conclusion with one of the final scenes, that of the tragic scene of Javert before the suicide. It's an extraordinary scene. And here again, oddly enough, there's a musical connection with the terrible night lived by Jean Valjean when he decides then to renounce his received love. So here again we see that mercy somehow amplifies the drama of freedom, accepting the gratuitousness of somebody else's love means acknowledging to be dependent on somebody. And there's a specific extract that I really like in Don Giussani's text, who writes that the top of love is accepting to be forgiven, because this is something that hits and affects our presumption and our pride. Oh, it is so true, because you would like to be loved because you're worth it. But if you want to be loved because you're worth it, you are not loving the other, but you're just loving yourself, and that's it. But maybe this is the real problem of modern man, refusing dependence. And Valjean and Javert are faced with the same gratuitousness. One surrenders and decides to embrace it as the completion of himself. The other resists up to the end. But still, he can't avoid acknowledging a greater justice, so that of a life enemy, he can't sort of bear it. He can't get away with it. So Javert is a character that has a sort of tragic greatness, and he sees the existence of a great court, and that has somehow turned into this man, and he matches that to a sort of pre-ordered, stable sort of setting. So to him, faith is being consistent with the order represented by God. But there can't be love for him, because love is too much blessed to him. It entails too many injuries. And Javert then, so he can finally sort of settle everything, but for the first time, something makes him hesitant. So Jean Valjean is getting away with Marius, and he let him go, but he can't bear sort of the cracking in his heart of stone. His world is collapsing, is going down into pieces. That's why he commits suicide. So Jean Valjean wins over him, wins over Javert, but not specifically. It's the man that got to know charity that wins. So he decided to bet on that charity. So the man that accepts to depend on a gaze that can make a man free. Thank you. And this is happiness.
Grazie, Davide.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Davide. I knew that inviting you was a good idea, and I would like to end with an announcement, and I'm very happy to transmit to you. What makes the meeting a unique event is that everything is totally and completely free of charge, as forgiveness. The exhibitions, any area for young people, the parking lots, everything is free. Everything is free of charge for any person joining the meeting. And you know what? Why is this gratuitousness is possible? Because it's possible through everybody's contribution. Workers, artists, and I'm very happy because I saw that there are many exhibitions. There is one on the 68 that was made by youngsters, 20 years of age. So it's great, and I had to talk about that yesterday with Bonisoli. And the visitors also give a little piece of them to the meeting with their time, energy, money, and talent. This year as well, it is possible to contribute to the meeting through donations. So you will find special places where you can donate, and there is a special red heart logo. And please just give your money as a donation to the voluntary meeting workers that are wearing a magenta shirt. Thank you for your donation. Thank you very much.